Alrighty, hi everybody. This is Jubilee again, and I'm back with another TA review video. So last week we did cover Intro to Microscopy, and hopefully that went well for everybody. I know there was a lot of new stuff going on, new things that you had to learn with all the assignments and everything, but hopefully that went well and we kind of picked up on everything that's going to be required of you every week. Again, if you do ever have any questions, please feel free to ask. You can ask in the student group me. You can direct message me. A lot of people have been doing that to ask more personal questions. You can text me, email me, and you can do the same for Kendall, as well as any of our other TAs, okay? So feel free to ask any questions if y'all do have them. And it doesn't have to be class related either. If you do have questions about vet school, about just getting through school for undergrad, anything like that, feel free to reach out, okay? But yeah, so last week we covered Intro to Microscopy, so hopefully that was a good little introduction for what we're kind of going to be looking at here in this course. And then remember that last week you learned about the 4 big tissue types, right, that make up an organ system, organism. So those 4 are going to be epithelium, connective tissue, muscle, and nerve. And this week for quiz 2, what we're going to be learning about are 2 of those, epithelium and connective tissue, okay? And so hopefully by the end of this, you'll know exactly what we're looking at in literally all of these pictures. So make sure that you're able to do that. But hopefully by the end of this, that should all be pretty clear for you. Okay. Alrighty. So the first tissue we're going to cover is going to be epithelium. Okay, so that again, that's one of the 4 basic tissue types that makes everything. So it is everywhere. Okay, it is everywhere. Throughout the body, throughout an organ system. And it has a lot of functions, as you'll notice, but a way that kind of helps me remember what epithelium is, that's a lot shorter of a definition, is that epithelium is a lining. Okay, it lines things. It is also a barrier, right? So if it's lining things, it's also protecting what goes in and what goes out of your body. Okay, so it lines almost every aspect of your body. And as a result, anything that's going either into or out of your body does have to pass through epithelium, okay? So it's a protective barrier and it's a protective lining. But we'll go over the functions in a little more detail. It's just a little harder to remember, such a long definition. So what epithelium does is it forms the outer protective surface of the body and all the glands. So when you look at your skin, right, your skin, it is a protective barrier, right? And the very top of that skin, we're going to look at in just a second, a little closer up, but that actually is epithelium, okay? That's one of the many types of epithelium, that outer protective surface. And then you do have glands in your skin, right? So you've got sweat ducts, hair follicles have little glands attached to them, we'll learn about later on. And all of that is from epithelium, okay? It comes from the epithelium that's lining your skin. It lines the walls of closed cavities and all passages leading to the exterior. So it lines your internal organs. It lines the cavities those internal organs are sitting in. And then it also lines the passage from your mouth to your rear end, right? So if you think of kind of the way your digestive system works, it's a really long tube. That's basically what it is, from your mouth to your rear end. And so your epithelium is going to line that very long, complicated tube that entire way, okay? Because again, it's a barrier, it's a lining, all right? And another thing it does is it lines blood and lymphatic vessels, okay? So your blood vessels, your lymphatic vessels, we'll look at them in a little more detail later. That's another hard one for people to understand because it's a very thin lining, but it is there, that epithelial lining, okay? And we'll learn in a second that it has a special name when it lines blood vessels and lymph vessels called endothelium, okay? Endothelium is just a subtype of epithelium, okay? And when it's lining your internal organs and those internal organ cavities, it's also called mesothelium, Okay, mesothelium is a subtype of epithelium. So I think a lot of people get kind of confused by that. But it's just because epithelium is so diverse, it comes in so many forms. But basically, when it comes down to it, it's a lining, okay? It's a barrier. And so, with that being said, all substances that pass either into or out of your body must pass through epithelium, okay? So, everything you eat, when it goes into your digestive system, in order to absorb all of that, it has to go through epithelium. Okay, everything that you're sweating out or secreting has to go through epithelium. Okay, so it is that barrier and that lining, and then it is also important for your glands. Okay, so like I talked about, your sweat glands, everything like that. Your epithelium will form those specialized tissues and structures that make up your glands. Alrighty. And then when we talk about the origin of epithelium, we're going to be talking about the endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. So this is basically just kind of a diagram to show you where different parts of your body originate from. So like I said before, if we simplify a complex organism down to basically a tube, that's what this is depicting, right? So you're a tube from your mouth to your rear end. So you've got your ectoderm on the outside, ecto meaning outermost, ectoderm. So that's going to be that outermost part of you, your skin, right? And we said that epithelium is going to be within the ectoderm. It's going to make up your skin, your epidermis. Sorry, my cat is driving me crazy. And it is going to make up those glands within your skin. So your sebaceous glands, your sweat glands, your mammary glands in that ectoderm. When we think of the mesoderm, that's kind of like the meat all in between. So your muscles, your organs, everything like that. And again, your epithelium is going to be there because it's going to be lining the blood and the lymph vessels in there. And then your endoderm is kind of that tube on the inside, right, from your mouth to your rear end. So that tube, your digestive system. So epithelium is going to line the alimentary tract, your digestive system, and then it's also going to line those internal organs, right? So this is just, a long roundabout way to say that your epithelium is found within all three layers, the basic three layers of your body, okay? The ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. All right, so you'll learn in histology we like to classify things, right? We like to give things name, and a lot of the times we have this kind of binary system, and so that's how we're going to classify epithelium. So it's this binary naming system, and so we classify epithelium based on two criteria. So the first one is going to be the shape of the topmost layer of that epithelium, okay? And so we said epithelium is a lining, and so it can be multiple cells thick, like we see we're talking about the shape first. So epithelium is a lining, but it can come in multiple shapes, right? And so what we want to do is we want to look at the topmost layer of that epithelium, okay? And so there's three different main types of epithelium. The first one is going to be squamous epithelium. And so squamous, I kind of think of it as meaning like squished. So it's very flat in shape, okay? So if you look at these cells right here, so this is epithelium, this is a lining, but it is only one cell thick and it is very flat. They look squished at the top, right? This one right here, you see how the cells are all squished at the top, right? And remember we said we classify based on the topmost layer. So don't look down here and try to tell me what kind of epithelium you think it is. Look at the topmost layer and you'll see how squished and squamous these look, so you can classify this as a squamous epithelium. Okay, the next shape that we have is cuboidal. So it's just like it sounds like, it's cube-like in shape, right? So here is an example of some cuboidal epithelium. Okay, and cells are never going to be picture perfect. They're never going to look like a perfect square. But what we mean by cuboidal is it's going to have about as much cytoplasm above and below the nucleus as it will on either side. Okay, So if it looks like it's got about the same amount of cytoplasm, top and bottom, as it does on the sides, it's cuboidal, right? Whereas in squamous, it's got way more cytoplasm on either side than it does top and bottom. There's almost none top and bottom because it is squished. Okay, then the third one is going to be columnar. So that's column-like in shape, right? And so when we think about columnar cells, they look like a column, right? And so this is going to be the opposite. So it's where we have way more cytoplasm, top and bottom of the nucleus, than we do on either side of the nucleus. Okay, so it's very column-like in shape. So that's the first term that we're going to apply to our epithelium. The next one we're going to classify is going to be based on the number of layers. Okay, so like I was trying to say earlier, but I was saying it too early, is we classify it by the number of layers, right? So it can have different numbers of layers, and so simple is what we're going to call epithelium that only has one layer. Okay, there is only a single layer of cells throughout here, right? So there's no epithelium, more epithelium on top or on bottom of here. It is one cell thick, right? Whereas the other one we're going to call is stratified, and that means there are more than one layer. Okay, so here you can see there are multiple layers of this same type of epithelium, so that we're going to call stratified. Okay, so here are some examples. So simple means one layer and squamous means flat. So as you can see, there's one layer of very flat cells. Simple cuboidal means one layer of very cuboidal cells, so about the same amount of cytoplasm top and bottom as side to side, right? Simple columnar means one layer of column-like cells, so more cytoplasm top and bottom. And then we'll go to stratified squamous. So stratified means multiple layers, squamous means flat, right, or squished. And so don't look on the bottom. Remember, we got to look at the top to see what shape we can classify these cells are, because there are more than one layer, right? But we want to look at the top layer. So stratified because there's more than one layer, squamous because the top layer of cells is flat in shape. Okay. And then we've got stratified columnar, and you might get confused by this, right? Because you're like, well, could these be cuboidal? Right, but remember, we're looking at the topmost layer. So this topmost layer, there is more cytoplasm on the top and bottom of the nuclei in each cell than there is on each side of the nuclei in these cells. So that would be columnar, and there's more than one layer of that, so it's stratified columnar. Okay. So yeah, this is a binary naming system, so we have two different terms to describe it, and we combine them together to classify this epithelium. Okay, and then I will teach you about some special types of epithelium that don't really fit that binary naming system, and that's going to be these two. So the first one is going to be pseudostratified columnar. Okay, and so when we think of what the word pseudo means false. Okay, stratified, that's, remember, more than one layer, and then columnar, column shaped. So if I'm saying falsely stratified, right, pseudo stratified, it has falsely more than one layer, that means it's trying to trick you, right? So it looks like there's more than one layer, right? There's a bunch of nuclei down here, a bunch of nuclei up here. It looks like there's more than one layer, but really there's only one. Okay, so if you trace every cell that's at the top here down to the base, it actually touches the base every single time. Sometimes it's just really hard to see it. Okay, not every cell that's on the base touches the top, but every cell at the top and all throughout here will touch the base. So it looks like there's more than one layer, but there is not. There's only one layer, so that's why it's pseudo-stratified columnar, because these are column-shaped cells. Okay, and this type of epithelium is special, and so it's really only found in the respiratory tracts. Okay, and we'll learn more about that when we go over the respiratory system later on in this semester, but just keep that in mind, okay, pseudostratified columnar. The next special type of epithelium we'll go over is going to be transitional epithelium, okay, and so it's found in the bladder and the urethra only, okay, and it's classified by this very bubbly appearance, okay, so if you look at the cells at the top, remember, they're very bubbly, and they kind of fold outward, and the reason they do that is they're kind of collapsed in on each other, And whenever they need to, they can actually spread out and unfold kind of like an accordion to take up more space, so to be bigger. Okay, and so what that does is it allows this epithelium to stretch out and expand without causing any tension on the epithelium, right? Because if I were to stretch it, that would create pressure, right? And so what this special epithelium does is it allows it to stretch and unfold like an accordion, and that does not increase the pressure within that organ. Okay, so when we think about the organs that it lines, the bladder and the urethra, remember the bladder is what's going to hold your urine, right? And it can hold it for extended periods of time. And the reason it can do that is because it can increase in size without increasing the pressure, right? So your bladder can go from very small to almost 3 times that size very easily without increasing the pressure. Okay, so that's very important in allowing you to hold it for urinary continence, right? So it allows it to hold it without increasing the pressure, because if we had a giant pressure in your bladder and the more and more urine you put in, the higher pressure it was, that would create problems in your kidneys, right? Your kidneys would have a really hard time creating more urine, can lead to kidney failure, everything like that, right? So we want to be able to just keep adding urine into the bladder without increasing that pressure. Okay. So now we're going to do some practice on labeling. So here are 2 examples. They're both the same type of epithelium, but if you look at them, so first we're going to do how many layers of epithelium are there. So I'll tell you it starts here and ends here. So you can see if I go from the base to the top, there's only 1 nucleus, right? From the base to the top, there's 1 nucleus, base to the top, 1 nucleus. So this layer of epithelium is only 1 cell thick. Okay, when you look at these, people get confused because they look at this and they say, oh my gosh, that's multiple layers, but it's just the way that it's cut. Okay, so in order to visualize the layers of epithelium, you have to cut it at the exact perfect angle through the cell. So when you get towards the ends of these little villi, it looks like there's more than 1 layer, but it's just because it's cut weird. Okay, so this is where it's cut perfectly, and here you can see there's 1 nuclei in this whole layer. 1 nucleus in this whole layer. Okay, so it is 1 cell thick. Okay, and so we have to remember what we call something that is 1 cell thick, and that is simple. All right, so that's our first term for this epithelium. It is simple. And then we need to look at the shape, right? So I'm going to outline the shape of this cell right here. And so you can see there is more cytoplasm above and below the epithelium than there is on either side, right? And so remember, the name that we had for that is going to be columnar in shape, right? So these are very columnar in shape. And so when we put those 2 together, remember, this is simple columnar epithelium. Okay, so this is simple columnar epithelium. This type of epithelium is mainly found in your digestive system, and that is because the shape of these epithelial cells really matches the function that they need to have, right? So remember, this is a barrier, right? So epithelium is a lining, it's a barrier. It's lining your digestive system in this case. And so what happens is, in here you have a bunch of blood vessels, right? Out here you have a bunch of food that you ate that needs to be absorbed, right? And so if we're going to take this food, allow it to go through these cells, we need a lot of time to process it, right? So we need to package up all that glucose, all that fat, everything like that, process it the right way before it gets to the blood. Okay, so it all needs to be broken down and processed before it gets to the blood inside these little villi. All right, and so that's what this shape of epithelium is useful for, right? So it's very tall, it's very columnar, so it takes a while for it to pass from one side of the epithelium to the other. Okay, so we'll go to our next one. So this is an EM, so remember, this is much more zoomed in than it is right here, but here you can see a nucleus, and all of this is the cytoplasm of that cell. Okay, and then it's touching another cell somewhere here or here, and there's another cell that's very flat. Okay, and so when you look at how many layers there are, you can see this is the whole epithelium, right? So it is one cell thick. There is only that nucleus, okay? If we look down here, this layer, this lining right here, is the epithelial layer, right? And so you can see it is only one cell thick. That's the nucleus of one cell. That's the nucleus of one cell, right? There are no other layers below it. So it is one cell thick, and remember we call that simple. So that's our first term, simple. But when we look at the shape, it's very different than the last one, right? So these are very flat. You can see there's almost no cytoplasm above and below the nucleus, right? Here, all you can see is the nucleus because there's so little cytoplasm. You can't really see the cytoplasm in these cells. All you can see is the nucleus kind of jutting out, but I promise that cytoplasm is there. It's connecting to the other cells like it is right here. It's just very flat and very tiny. Okay, and so remember, so we already got simple, and then the shape would be very flat, very squished, so that's squamous. So this is simple squamous epithelium, okay, one layer of very flat cells. And this type of epithelium, so we're going to think of the function, right? Why would you need only one layer of very flat cells as a barrier? Okay, so remember the columnar cells were very tall to give us more processing time, to take more time to get from the inside to the outside or vice versa. These simple columnar are very flat to make the time it takes to pass from in here in this little blood lymph vessel to in the tissues very short. Okay, so this type of epithelium, simple squamous, is designed for easy transportation, right? So it lines your blood vessels and it lines the alveoli in your lungs, because remember, we're transporting things from your blood to your tissues, and we want that to be fast, okay? We don't want it to have to go through multiple layers. We don't want it to have to go through very tall layers, right? So we just want it to be as flat, as easy as possible, so all of the nutrients in your blood can get to your tissues, right? So all the oxygen in your lungs can get to your blood. So that's what that type of epithelium is for, okay? This is our next one. So this is the epithelium. This is the outermost edge of it, and this is the base of that epithelium, okay? And so how many layers are there? Hopefully you can tell there are multiple layers, right? So many layers in here of cells. All of this dark, hot pink stuff, okay? So we're going to call that stratified when there's multiple layers. And then what shape are they in? So remember I said you want to look at the top of the epithelium, okay? The top, not at the base. So I know that this image is flipped, but this is the outside of the body, this is the inside of the body. So this would be the top of that epithelium where it's growing out to. So it's growing from here out. And so when you look at these are very flat and squished. You can even see down here how flat and squished they are. Here they're so flat and squished that they kind of blend together, right? So remember the flat, the squished ones, that's going to be squamous. So what we call this epithelium would be stratified squamous epithelium, because there are multiple layers, but they are very flat at the top. Okay, so don't look at the base and try to tell me, look at the top. Okay, and so when we try to think of the function of this type of epithelium, why would we need so many really flat, really small cells, but so many layers of them? Okay, this type of epithelium is designed to be durable and to stand up to friction. Okay, so you'll find this type of epithelium in places like your skin. Okay, because remember, your skin, it's open to the external environment, right? So that's that barrier that keeps you safe from germs and everything. And you're constantly losing those cells every time you brush up against something, every time you touch something. Super small amounts of these cells are falling off and flaking off. Okay, and that's because of their shape. So it allows them to fall off, to flake off, and then you've got all of these cells below it to replace it. So it's not a big deal. Okay, so that's why you need multiple layers of these very hard flat cells, because every time you touch something, every time you brush up against your arm or something, you have that friction. Those cells are just going to flake off and they'll be replaced by the next layer. Okay, so that's what this type of epithelium is really helpful for. So places with lots of friction. Okay, and then here we've got another one. So I'll tell you right now, these are sweat glands. And remember, we said glands, like your sweat glands, come from epithelium, right? And then what we're going to classify here are the sweat ducts. So these hot pink ones, you see how they're a brighter pink than these big clusters right here. So these big clusters are the sweat ducts, okay? And then these these big clusters are the sweat glands that are actually producing the sweat, and they empty into the sweat ducts. So these hot pink ones. Sorry about that. So all of these hot pink bright ones. Okay, and so we're going to classify this type of epithelium. So this type of epithelium, how many layers are there? So to me, it looks like there's multiple layers, right? There's not as many as in stratified squamous that we just looked at, but there's multiple layers, right? It's not one cell thick like it is in our blood vessels right here. That's a little lymph vessel with one cell thick epithelium, right? Here you can see there are multiple layers within there, right? And then what shape are they, right? So they're not that big columnar shape, but they're not quite as flat as this squamous shape, okay? And I know this one's kind of tricky because it's not a perfect cube, right? Nothing in real life is ever going to be a perfect square, but there's about as much cytoplasm on all sides of these cells, okay? So we're going to call this stratified cuboidal, okay? So more than one layer of cube-like cells. Okay, and that is a special type of epithelium that is pretty much only found in your sweat ducts. Okay, you don't have very many stratified cuboidal cells, stratified cuboidal epithelial cells like that. Okay, and then we're going to do this one. So this, I'll give you a hint, is a special type of epithelium, right? So it doesn't fit our normal little definitions that we have. But if you zoom in on here, you can see how bubbly it is, right? Like it's folding in on itself, okay? And remember, we said that this special bubbly type of epithelium is called transitional epithelium, okay? Transitional epithelium. And I know a lot of you guys can get confused and you can say, well, isn't this kind of stratified cuboidal? They look cuboidal to me. There's more than one layers. But remember I said that stratified cuboidal is pretty much only in the sweat ducts, okay? This is that special type of epithelium, transitional epithelium, remember? And I said it is only in the bladder and the urethra, and that is to be able to expand, to be able to increase this epithelial lining in size without increasing the pressure or the tension or the stretch that's put on this epithelium. Okay, so it's very special, and if I show you this epithelium, you should know you're either looking at the bladder or the urethra. Okay, this one, so this one that we're going to be looking at, so I'll show you here, this is in the kidneys, okay, and so here you can see we've got one cell layer thick, okay, so from here to here, that's one cell layer thick, here to here, right, you can only see one little nucleus, so it is one cell layer thick, so we're going to call that simple. And then the shape that they're in, so they're about as tall as they are wide, okay? They're about as tall as they are wide. You just can't see every nuclei within here because they're not, regular. It's like trying to cut a hard-boiled egg straight down the middle. Not everyone gets cut straight down the middle, so we're missing some of the nuclei in here, but I promise they're in here. Okay, so these are the ones that got cut straight down the middle so we can see their nuclei. And so here you can see this is going to be a simple squamous epithelium. Okay, so it is not as flat, simple cuboidal. I was thinking of what it's not. So this is simple cuboidal because it's about as tall as it is thick, right? And it is not near as flat as those simple squamous ones that we saw earlier. So this is simple cuboidal, all right, and so these types of epithelium, simple cuboidal, one layer of cube-like cells, is commonly found in glands, okay, and then it's commonly found in the kidney, so that's what this is right here, and that is because cells that are secreting things, that are making products in your body are normally going to be fat, bubbly type cells, okay, with a lot of cytoplasm. And so that's why they're cuboidal. They've got a lot of cytoplasm because they are secreting things, they're making things, stuff like that. So they're commonly found in glands and in your kidneys. All right, so here's the last one. So we're going to label this one. And so first off, how many layers are there, so that's really important. And if you look, it seems like there's this layer of cells kind of lining up, and then there's another layer of cells lining up, right? But when you look at the shape, it looks like they're kind of column-like, right? And you might be thinking this one's kind of tricky, because it is. This is a special type of epithelium, and so this is that special pseudostratified columnar. Okay, so it looks like there's more than one layer, but if you could trace every single one of these cells up here, it would touch the base. Every single one of these cells up here would touch the base. So it really is only one layer, even though it looks like there's multiple. Okay, but they are column-like at the top, so it's going to be pseudostratified, falsely stratified columnar. Okay, and this type of epithelium, like I said earlier, is commonly found in the respiratory tract. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the junctions in epithelium, because remember we said epithelium is a lining, right? It's a barrier. It lines everything in your body, and so everything that's either going into or out of your body has to pass through these epithelial cells. Okay, so it's what waterproofs you, right? Your skin, that's why you don't just fill up with water whenever you put your hand in a bowl of water, right? And so the reason it's waterproof and it can do that is because of these things called terminal bars. Terminal bars. So this is a special thing that is in epithelium at the very microscopic electron microscopy level, that kind of waterproofs anything, proofs these cells, so that if something needs to come from the outside inside or inside outside, it has to go through the cell, right, instead of in between the cells, because what kind of barrier would it be if it just let anything in between the cells, right? So it has to go through the cell, and that way the cell can decide what it's going to let through, right? So it's a barrier. And so these terminal bars are made up of three big things, and I do need you guys to know this. So the first one is going to be the zonula occludens. Zonula occludens, okay? And what the zonula occludens is it's this topmost kind of thing that wraps around the cell and connects it to all the other cells around it. It is a tight junction, okay? So that is what's waterproofing you. So it is a very tight junction that kind of sticks these two cells together so that nothing can go in between them, okay? So it's that's what the zonula occludens is. The zonula adherens is an adhering belt. So the way I think of that, it's pretty obvious, adherence, adhering belt, right? So the way I kind of think about that is it's kind of like Velcro, right? So Velcro is going to make it very hard for you to pull those things apart. It's the Velcro between the two cells, but it's not a tight junction, right? So if I want water, Velcro is not waterproof. So if I want water to go in between these two pieces of Velcro, it'll go in between them, right? And so the zonula adherens is to stick them together, but the zonula occludens is to waterproof it, okay? Because water could still go through that. So that's why we need the zonula occludens, the zonula adherens. And then the next one is going to be desmosomes. So desmosomes are found all throughout the cell, the epithelial cells, okay? And what those do is they're like little spot attachments, okay? They're little pinches of the cell membrane where I'm literally taking the cell and I'm pinching them together to make this tiny little spot attachment, and so that goes all throughout the cell, okay? All throughout the cell to attach it, okay? And it is between two epithelial cells. Remember, all of this is a special function of epithelium. Okay, so like I said, epithelium is a lining, so that's why we need these terminal bars. That's why we need this special thing. If we didn't, everything could go in between the cells, and we don't want that, right? The whole point is for it to be a barrier. So we want it to go through the cells. Okay, and then a bonus, because you guys are going to have this on your quiz, or at least some of you will, is a hemidesmosome. Right, so we talked about a desmosome. That's a spot attachment between this epithelial cell and the next epithelial cell. Hemidesmosome, remember, hemi means half, means half. So it's like half of a desmosome. So what that is it is a spot attachment from one epithelial cell to the base, okay, to the basal lamina that anchors it down. So it's a spot attachment from here to here, not in between epithelial cells, but just touching one epithelial cell and then the base. Okay, so it's half of a desmosome. It's only touching one epithelial cell. These are touching two together. Okay. Alrighty, so that's the end of epithelium. Now we're going to go on to connective tissue. It's a little quicker. So connective tissue is the histological glue, okay? It sounds just like what it is. It connects things. It glues things together. It binds this type of tissue to another type of tissue. And that helps to form organs and tissues, everything like that, right? And so it does have a lot of functions other than just connecting things, right? So it provides mechanical support to your body. And so remember, we just learned that this is epithelium, right, on your skin, that stratified squamous epithelium. But, and we said it's there to withhold upstand against friction, right? So we've got things constantly rubbing on here, right? But this is good at holding up against friction. But if I, press really hard on my arm and I try to rub that skin off, right? We have to have something to prevent this whole layer from actually peeling off, right? So your skin doesn't just completely peel off of itself. So we need something to anchor it down to the rest of the tissues. What's going to help do that is connective tissue, okay? So this stroma, this just kind of giant conglomerate of cells down here of connective tissue is connecting this skin down to the tissues below it. Okay, so that your skin doesn't just fall off and peel off and the whole thing just flakes off at once. Okay, it's connecting things. Another thing that provides mechanical support is going to be your skeleton, right? Remember we said that bone is a type of connective tissue, right? So that's providing support to your body. Metabolite exchange is a big function, and we'll learn that epithelium is avascular, and what that means is there are no blood vessels in this epithelium, right? And so in order for these cells to stay alive, they need to get blood, they need to get oxygen, nutrients, everything like that from the connective tissue below it. Okay, so connective tissue is where you're going to find all of your blood vessels. Okay, all of your blood vessels and your lymph vessels. So it is a vascular bed that allows for metabolite exchange, okay, for oxygen, nutrients, metabolites to exchange from your blood vessels to other tissues like your epithelium. Okay, it's also there for energy storage, so fat, white fat, adipose tissue. That's what adipose tissue is. We'll look at a better example in a second. That is a part of connective tissue, right? And so that's there for energy storage, right? You can store your fat, save it for a rainy day. Inflammation is another function of connective tissue. Because remember, we said this is avascular right here, right? And we do have blood vessels down here. Okay, so if I have an infection going on, right? If I get a cut, and it breaks through the skin and we've got bacteria, we've got germs, everything bad in here. These blood vessels in the vascular bed, white blood cells are going to come rushing in. They're going to fight off this infection. They're hopefully going to deal with all these bacteria, all these germs, everything that came in when you cut yourself, when you broke that skin, right? And so that is what connective tissue is there for. It allows for these white blood cells to go in to save the day, to fight off bacteria. Okay, so that is the site of action where this happens, where those white blood cells kind of fight off this battle between them and the bacteria. All right, so just like we had two little classification methods for epithelium, we have a different kind of binary naming system that works for connective tissue. Okay, so again, we have two different terms that we apply to connective tissue to make one name to describe it. So the first criteria that we use to define connective tissue is how tightly packed the collagen fibers are. Okay, so connective tissue is made up primarily of collagen fibers. That's that tissue that can withstand stretching, that can spring back once it is stretched. That's collagen. Okay, and so we look at how densely packed these collagen fibers are to help us define that connective tissue. So the way that I think about it, so fibroblasts are these cells that are building these fibers in connective tissue. Okay, so they're the main kind of cell that makes connective tissue, that makes that collagen. Okay, and so the way that I think about dense and loose connective tissue is how hard those fibroblasts are working. Okay, so if it is dense connective tissue, these fibroblasts are working very hard. Okay, so it means they are putting out and secreting and making so much collagen compared to how many fibroblasts there are. So you can see here, this is a picture of dense connective tissue. And so here you can see there's one little like nucleus of a fibroblast. All of this pink stuff is collagen that this fibroblast made. Okay, and so you can see here, this one little fibroblast probably made all of this collagen. It probably produced all of that collagen. So this one little fibroblast is working very hard, right? It is working very hard. It is putting out all this collagen everywhere. So I would say that this is dense connective tissue. Dense connective tissue, because there is a lot of collagen compared to how many fibroblasts there are. All right, if I look at this one, so here you can see all of these little darker spots are the nuclei of little fibroblasts, right? Those fibroblasts are making these little red things, those collagen bundles. Okay, and so if I were to say how busy these fibroblasts look, they don't look near as busy as this one, right? There's a little bit of collagen in between all of them, but there's a lot of them here, okay? And they haven't made near as much collagen as this one did all by itself, right? So they look kind of lazy. They're not really making all that much collagen compared to how many little workers there are here, how many little fibroblasts there are. So these fibroblasts like to chill, so I would call this loose connective tissue, okay? So this is dense, this is loose connective tissue. The second way we're going to define connective tissue is how the collagen fibers are arranged, okay? And so the collagen fibers that these little fibroblasts are making can be considered either regular or irregular, okay? Sorry. So you can see here, this one little fibroblast, you can see all of the little collagen bundles, okay? Within here, and we'll look at ones that look really regular and all the little collagen bundles are running neatly in the same direction. Here you can really see they are not at all running in the same direction, right? They are going crazy in here. So that is irregular. Okay. So here we'll look at some more examples. So identify these. So these are different types of connective tissue, right? So you can see here, so I'll tell you right now, this is adipose tissue. This is fat. Okay, these are little fat globules. And so what happens is this whole thing is a little fat cell, a little fat globule. The adipose that's actually stored within here just doesn't stain. Okay, so there actually is something in here. It is that fat that's being stored. It just does not pick up any stain, so we can't see it. Okay, but there's something there. And then a way that we kind of like to help you guys remember if it is white fat, if it is adipose tissue, it looks like chicken wire. You see how this kind of looks like chicken wire? So this is adipose tissue, this is white fat. And if we're trying to classify what kind of connective tissue this would be, so you can see there are some fibroblasts in here, right? These little dark nuclei of the fibroblasts, but there are very few bundles, right? It's very white and blank. There are very few bundles of connective tissue compared to how many fibroblasts there are. So I would call this loose connective tissue. They are not all running in the same direction, so I would call this irregular. So loose, irregular connective tissue. Okay, here, so this one, all of this is connective tissue. Okay, and so each one of these little dots is a little nucleus. And so when you look, like especially at an area right here, right? So this fibroblast is all surrounded by connective tissue. You see how much more pink, how much more collagen is in here than in this picture right here. So this I would consider dense. This is very dense. These fibroblasts are working hard. They are packing this thing full of connective tissue. but they're also going every which direction, right? They're twisting everywhere. These little collagen bundles are twisting around everywhere, making little circles and crazy things. So that would be irregular. So this would be dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, and then here is a good example of what I would consider dense, regular connective tissue. So here you can see, right, we've got these little nuclei. Those are the nuclei of the fibroblasts, and this is all the collagen that they're making. Okay, so there's a lot of collagen packed in here, right? So this is definitely dense, and you can see how every little collagen bundle is running in the same direction. It looks so perfect, all in this up and down direction, right? So that would be dense, regular connective tissue. Okay, and when we think of the functions for what dense, regular connective tissue would be useful for, right? So we've got all of this really tough, really stringy collagen all stretching in the same direction. What that would be useful for is in things like tendons, like ligaments. Okay, so when you think of tendons and ligaments, those are designed to be stretched in one direction and one direction only, because that is what is connecting your muscle to a part on the bone. Okay, and so that muscle is only going to flex in one direction and one direction only. And so we need a tendon that can withstand that stretch in one direction and one direction only. Okay, so we only need these collagen fibers to go this way, right? But you can imagine if I pulled from each side, right? So if I had a little fist right here and a little fist right here, and I pulled outwards, how there would be no collagen fibers to withstand that kind of pull, right? So I could really easily pull from here and pull from here and pull this apart, right? But that's not the way this collagen is designed. It's designed to withstand force from here and from here. Right? So if you pull from here and here, there is no way you're going to rip that. It's going to be very hard. Okay? So that's dense, regular. So it's only found in special places like tendons, ligaments, stuff like that. Okay? The more common kind of connective tissue is dense, irregular connective tissue. So that's found in a lot of places, right? We already said it's found under your skin to anchor that epithelium down to the rest of the tissues below it, right? It's also found lining your organs. So you can see here, this is the kidney. We'll learn more about that later. This out here is actually connective tissue, right? Connective tissue, remember we said that's glue. It's binding together. It's holding this kidney together. It's holding the outside of this kidney together. Okay? And if I were to ask you if this is regular or irregular, a lot of you might say it's regular because it kind of looks like it is, right? But it's just the way that it's cut. It's cut on a cross section, but it is not like a tendon, right? We're not looking at a tendon, we're looking at a capsule of the kidney. And the kidney is designed to be squished, compressed, stretched in all which directions, right? It's not like a tendon. And so we want it to withstand force, withstand stretching in every which direction. So if you think what kind of connective tissue makes sense to be on the outside of a kidney, it would be dense, irregular, right? So these are dense fibers. There's a lot of collagen in here compared to the nuclei of these little fibroblasts, right? But it is irregular because it's there to withstand force in every direction, right? You're not always going to pull on the kidney in the exact same direction. Sometimes it'll be squished and moved in different directions. So we need that connective tissue to be able to withstand that, right? Just like your skin. You want your skin to be able to be squished and pulled and rubbed in multiple different directions and to withstand that. So that would be dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, hopefully this is making sense to you guys. So the cells of connective tissue. So remember we said that connective tissue is the site for metabolite exchange, for inflammation, for energy storage, mechanical support. So there's a lot of different cell types that can be in connective tissue. And we're going to go over some of the main ones. Okay, so by the end of this, you should know what every single one of these cells is and what they do. Okay. So, the first one we're going to learn about is the mast cell. And so these mast cells have a very distinctive appearance, okay? Most cells are going to have a darker, more purpley nucleus, right? And more pink cytoplasm. Mast cells are the opposite, okay? They have a dark red nucleus and very bright blue purple granules. in an H&E stain, okay? And so these mast cells, that's how you can identify them. What they are is they're cells that can be in the connective tissue, and what they do is produce histamines, okay? And histamines are a big mediator for inflammation. So what they do is if they see something is going wrong in the tissues, right? If you got a cut, if you have an infection, anything like that, they're going to pick up on that and they're going to jut out some histamines. And what those histamines do is call other cells to the site. So they're going to say, hey, something is going on here. We need everybody. Bring the white blood cells, bring the platelets, bring the macrophages, bring them all here because we have a battle going on. Somebody just cut themselves and we need to fight off this bacteria, these germs, whatever just came in. Okay, so that is what mast cells do. So when you find a lot of mast cells, they're not very common. When you find a lot of mast cells, it tells you that some kind of inflammation, some kind of infection, some kind of irritation is going on in that site. Okay. The next one is going to be a macrophage. Okay, and the macrophage is basically a generic garbage can. Okay, so like I said, if the mast cells find something and they say, oh my gosh, we need to produce histamines, we need to get everybody here, the macrophages are actually going to come to try to help out. And what they're going to do is they're just going to start eating up stuff that they do not recognize. So if they're like, oh my gosh, this bacteria, never seen it before, I'm going to eat it and get it out of here. Okay. So that's what they do. They just eat stuff that they don't recognize as self. Okay, and they can digest that. So any kind of junk, tar in your lungs, right? For smokers, anything that you inhaled, they'll eat up. Okay, and that's why they turn this kind of black color, because they eat up carbon as well. So that's what macrophages do. They clean up garbage, okay? And then they also present antigens to lymphocytes, but that's a little more than you guys need to know. So they'll show whatever they ate up. They say they'll literally eat something and they'll be like, hey, look what I found. And they'll show it to the lymphocytes so the lymphocytes can figure out what's been going on in this tissue. Okay, the next cell we've already talked about, right? Those are the fibroblasts. These fibroblasts are what makes the collagen that makes up connective tissue, right? So they're making all this pink stuff, all this collagen. So this isn't a light microscopy of a fibroblast. This is an EM, electron microscopy of a fibroblast. But what they're doing, so this whole thing right here is the fibroblast. Okay, all of this collagen is what it made outside of the cell. So it makes the collagen and it puts it outside of the cell. Okay, so don't look at this and tell me that this is the cytoplasm of a fibroblast. This is not in a fibroblast cell. This is the collagen outside of the fibroblast cell. Okay, if you're confused with that, please feel free to ask a TA in help desk. But that is how collagen in fibroblasts work. The next one is going to be a plasma cell. So plasma cells are what they look like is kind of like a cracked egg. So they're always going to have this perfect little circular nucleus, right? Like the yolk of an egg. It looks so perfect and round. And then it's got the little egg whites kind of whichever way around it. Okay? So it looks like you literally cracked an egg that you're trying to make. They're kind of always going to look like that. I think they look cute. But what they do is they produce antibodies, right? So again, this is where we're fighting off infections and everything, right? So if infection happens, this plasma cell is going to start producing antibodies to help fight off whatever it's designed to fight off, okay? So if that specific bacteria that it's there to fight shows up, it can start producing antibodies to help fight off that infection, okay? And then fat cells, we already talked about, right? That's in connective tissue. So this is one little fat cell. It looks like chicken wire. That's there to store energy. It's also there to insulate you and keep you warm, right? So now we're going to practice identifying some. So this one right here, right? Remember we said this bright red nucleus with blue cytoplasm is different than most cells. So it really sticks out here. This is going to be a mast cell. Right, a mast cell, and remember we said those are there for inflammation to call everybody else to the scene, right? So you can see there's quite a few here. You don't normally see 3 mast cells so close to each other, so that tells me that there's inflammation going on in here. That tells me that something's going on, that these mast cells are trying to bring attention to. Okay, here So this cell right here, right, it's got that perfect nucleus. This cell right here, it's got that perfect nucleus, and then some big pink cytoplasm kind of floating on either side of it, right? So it looks like a cracked egg. That's a plasma cell. And remember we said those produce antibodies, okay? These right here, so this kind of black, these black little blobs right here, these are macrophages, okay? And the reason they stain like that is because we literally fed them carbon. So it's a special stain. We put carbon in the tissues, and the macrophages eat it up, and then they stain this very dark black because they just eat junk. So they're going to eat up that carbon, they're going to eat all of that. So they look very black and grainy. Those are macrophages, just trash cans. Okay, so that's the end of that. Hopefully that made sense to you guys. So now we're just going to go over some questions really quickly to see, if you learned anything, if you remember any of this. So which image structure best matches the stated functions of connective tissue? Okay, connective tissue. So the first thing I'm gonna kind of point out is when we look at A, what is A pointing to? Right? Remember, we learned this week, this is epithelium. This is that stratified squamous epithelium, more than one layer of flat epithelium. This is the outermost part of your skin. Okay, so it's not connective tissue, it's epithelium. So that one's already going to be wrong. B, it says mechanical support. So this is that dense, irregular connective tissue anchoring down this epithelium to everything under it. And so yes, this is going to be there for mechanical support, right? It's keeping this skin from peeling off. So it is there for mechanical support, so B would be right. C, inflammation. So C, remember what this is pointing to. These are those fat cells, that chicken wire looking stuff, right? So this is adipose tissue, right? And that is not where inflammation occurs. It does not occur in your fat. Remember we said it occurs up here in this dense irregular connective tissue where you have all these blood vessels. You see all these big old blood vessels in here? That's where the white blood cells come out and they start fighting if you get a cut and everything. So this would be the site of inflammation, not C. Okay, so the only answer correct would be B. And just so you guys know, this area B right here would be where you would see metabolite exchange and inflammation. So all of these functions of connective tissue would be found in B. Okay, so epithelium is classified based on, and remember we said there's two things we use to classify epithelium, right? So we said the shape of cells on its surface, right? Not on the base. Right, so we want to look at the surface of that epithelial lining to classify the shape of it. Okay, so B is automatically wrong, and then the number of nuclei in each cell, that is false, right? We don't care about the number of nuclei in each cell. Most of the time it's going to be one nuclei unless something's wrong or unless it's about to divide. Even then that would be wrong. But anyway, so yeah, remember we said the number of layers that there are is what we would classify it on. Okay, so it would only be A, and remember what the other thing, I just said it, that we use to classify epithelium, that would be the number of layers, not the number of nuclei, the number of layers of epithelial cells. Okay, so now we're doing some matching, which type of epithelium also matches the image. So A, so these look like very flat cells and there's only one layer. So that would be simple squamous. Right here we've got a little blood vessel. And remember, blood vessels, we want really flat cells and only one layer. So that would be simple squamous, right? So both of these are simple squamous. If we look right here, this says stratified cuboidal of sweat ducts. So that would be wrong. That does not match, okay? When we look at B, so here is more than one layer. So stratified of cube-like cells, so stratified cuboidal, okay? And when we look here, so these are sweat glands, right? And remember I said these hot pink looking things are the sweat ducts. And I said that the sweat ducts are one of the only places you'll see stratified cuboidal. Okay, so if we look here, that is not stratified cuboidal of sweat ducts, so this is actually switched, right? So if A said simple squamous endothelium, that would be correct because it is one layer, really flat cells, and that is that special name endothelium that we use for that. Okay, stratified cuboidal of sweat ducts, that matches B. So those two are switched, so hopefully C is right. So C, we can see there's more than one layer, right? And if we look at the top, those cells are very flat, they're very squished. So this would be stratified squamous epithelium. If we look right here, this is more than one layer, and if you look at the top, those are all so squished together, they almost look like it's one big blob. That is stratified squamous epithelium. So C is the only one that's correct. Okay, so as always, there's more things that you guys need to know than what I can cover in this review. Hopefully this was a lot of the big points and everything, and it made things clearer for you guys. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. Go to help desk, explain to them what you're confused on. But yeah, I wish you nothing but the best of luck, and good luck with this quiz.